to say it one more time for you guys, and then on the count of 3, we're going to all practice together after that. All right, so it's white. All right, everyone ready? White, 2, 3. White. Excellent. All right. So, as I say, when you guys are being a part of the language revitalization, we thank you for it. Thomas and I thank you for it, and very happy to have you all here tonight. Do the housekeeping before we get to the real reason you guys came tonight. We have a few things coming up. We have our senior workshop series, so we're going to be on photo care. We've only got 7 spots remaining. That's on February 13th. We got 1 p.m. And then the next thing we'll have coming up after that is Family Day here at the museum on the 15th. Miss that one. And then after you are here tonight, there's still another thing going on. If you weren't aware, there's a City Veteran Education Committee's fundraiser, Minus Hall, so they'll still be going on after we finish here tonight. So, once you've partied out here, go down there and bring the party that way, and they'll enjoy it too, I'm sure. Yeah. All right. You know what? I know you guys didn't come here to hear me. You guys came here to hear from an author, from a traveler, from an all-around adventurer, Dan Grec. So please join me in welcoming Dan up front. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Father. Thanks very much, everyone, for the welcome. My name is Dan, and you can probably hear from my accent, I am originally from Australia a long time ago. I came over to Canada 25 years ago, and it's been my home ever since. I absolutely love it. And so tonight, we're here to talk about this big adventure that I took. And this was quite a few years ago now, about 15 years ago. And I drove the length of the Pan American Highway, commonly called the longest road in the world. And so a little bit of a roadmap of what we're going to talk about tonight. First of all, we'll talk quite a bit about my trip and stories and things that I learned. And down in the bottom left there's a map of the Americas, and there's a little red dot on that map. That red dot will always show you where I'm talking about. So if you see a photo that looks amazing, you'll be able to see, is it in Central America, is it in South America? Kind of give you a bit of reference of where we are in the world. The next thing I really get excited about is talking about your trip and what you can do. I'm always excited to kind of help people get out there on the road and to teach them things and just inspire them. So I really want to encourage you guys to always get out there and travel as well, not just listen to my stories. And then at the end of the session, we'll have time for plenty of questions, and everything's on the table. Don't be afraid to ask any questions that you want. I'm totally open. So how did all this start? How did all this come about? I was living in Calgary at the time. I was working as an engineer, and I bought this little Jeep because I love having adventures in the mountains. I would drive out to Kananaskis on the weekends after work, and sitting at the desk every day just didn't make me very happy. I was 27, and it occurred to me that if I wasn't careful, I could spend the rest of my life doing that, and that really scared me. And I thought to myself, it's now or never. If I don't make something happen, nothing's going to happen. And I'll just sit at the desk forever. So I started saving money because money was my big limiting factor. And I worked for 3 years in Calgary, saving every penny that I could. And then when the time came, I quit my job, I sold all of my stuff, and I packed whatever I could fit in that little Jeep. And at the time, my dream really was the Yukon in Alaska. When I was a kid, I read a lot of Jack London books. Mum would always read them to me. And I was just enamored, and I always had wanted to see Alaska. And living in Calgary, I realised that it was so close, it was actually possible. So kind of the whole idea originally was like, why don't I go and spend a summer in Alaska? And I'll do lots of camping and hiking. It'll be amazing, that sounds fantastic. And then a friend said, Dan, why don't you go down to Mexico? They have really good beaches, and you like surfing, and they have good street food and tacos. And I said, I like tacos. And I clearly remember the day I went to one of the malls in Calgary and I wanted to buy a map of Mexico. And when I bought the map of Mexico, it had all Central America on the map. So when I got home, I kind of looked at the map for about an hour and I thought, London, I'm like, I'm an ordinary guy, I don't have any sponsors, I don't have much money. What happens if I do this? I don't actually have time. Possible, or like you have to work with National Geographic to be able to do something like this. And so I just set out and said, I'm just going to take every day, one day at a time, and I'm going to see what happens. And if I don't enjoy it, or I don't feel safe, or I run out of money, or the Jeep gets stolen or burns to the ground, that's fine. That's fine. I'll just get on a plane and I'll go and do something else. And I wasn't kind of like determined or gung ho. I just wanted to take every day one step at a time. Because otherwise, to be honest, the whole thing was immensely overwhelming. I remember before I even left my job, one of my friends started telling me about Peru, and he was saying, when you get to Peru, you're going to have an incredible time. And I was like, whoa, I'm going to go to Peru, that's crazy. Like, we're in Canada right now. I can't go to Peru. Maybe. So I really tried hard not to look too far ahead and just focus on now. And I spent quite a bit of time hiking and camping in the mountains in Kananaskis and then coming to BC. So I kind of had my routines dialed. Like, I had a little camping tent, I had a camp stove, and I decided to just take the gear that I knew and trusted. My old tent, I got it for my 18th birthday. All of my old gear, I thought, I know it works, I know how to use it. And as much as I wanted to buy a bunch of upgrades for my little Jeep, like I think a fridge would have been really nice, and these days people have those tents that go on the roof, and maybe a winch on the front of the Jeep, and maybe new tyres, and suddenly that was my whole travel budget gone. So I sat down and I really thought about it, and I said, I can spend all that money on all those cool things and not go anywhere. Or don't buy any of that stuff and just go. So that's what I did. And so my rough approach all along, the goal was, I'm going to try and sleep in my tent as much as I possibly can, hopefully for free, if I can find places to do that, because I didn't have much money. And I wanted to cook all of my own food, because that was a good way to save money as well. So I would buy food from the street markets or wherever I could, chickpeas, rice, beans, potatoes, and just cook them in my little camp stove. I always knew all along I would just stop whenever I didn't want to drive anymore. So some people think this kind of trip means you're just going to drive for 10 hours a day. That was absolutely not my goal, what I wanted to do. I was like, no, an hour a day is plenty. And it actually turned out on average, I drove an hour a day. And I decided early on that if I get to somewhere that I really like, I'm just going to stay. Maybe I'll stay for 3 days, maybe I'll stay for a week. I don't know. I'll just see what there is to do. And if I meet interesting people and learn stuff and have lots of things to look at, then I'll hang around. But other times, if I get to a place, maybe it's like a busy city or there's lots of traffic or the beach is dirty, or I'll just move on. I don't need to stay in places like that. So all along, the whole trip really was like, I'm just going to do whatever I want. And I also really wanted to try and take advice from locals, from other travellers, from people I met along the way about what to see and where to go. So again, there was no TripAdvisor, there was no Instagram, there was no just look online and get your travel itinerary. I didn't have any of that. I just talked to people, and people would say, oh, there's this awesome hot spring, or if you drive out here to this lake, you can camp on the lake. And so that was sort of the itinerary of my trip. And as the months rolled on, sort of the first few weeks were hyper exciting, and up into Alaska and the Yukon was everything I dreamed of. But as time rolled on, it kind of rolled into months. I started to realize at some point that this wasn't just a vacation, it actually started to become my whole life. And so every single day I got into these routines, and I started camping in these amazing and beautiful places, and I would just be outside in nature, enjoying myself as much as I possibly could. Often I would find myself camping by myself. It's kind of easier to be away from people, I found. And so I read a lot of books, I did a lot of exercise, I swam on the beach whenever I could. And this is kind of what my daily life started to look like. At times I would pay to camp in a hostel or a campground, depending on what there was. That was great, because then I got a hot shower, I got to meet other travellers, lots of advantages. So North America was an amazing time for me to sort of get into my routines, get really used to like resupplying with food and drinking water and all of that sort of logistical stuff. But I feel like the adventure really began once I crossed into Mexico. And it always had been this kind of big thing in my mind. And so I decided early on that I was going to drive down to Baja, because I Lots of people speak English still. It's fairly contained, and it's not crazy traffic and all that stuff. So I drove the length of Baja, and it was amazing. But of course, when you get to the bottom of Baja, you don't really want to just drive back up again. So I looked into it, and there was a ferry across to the mainland. And it was an overnight ferry. I think it took 14 hours from memory. And on that ferry, I ended up chatting to some truck drivers. I'm holding my Spanish dictionary there in my hand, because I had to use that to be able to try and communicate. I slept out on the open deck of the ferry. And there was something that clicked in me where I realised, I thought, this is by far the biggest thing I've ever done in my life. And it's starting to feel like some of those books that I'd read that were so inspirational about these people who do these cross-continent journeys. And I really had to start pinching myself, being like, this is really crazy, and it's kind of overwhelming. But again, I'm just going to focus on the now, and like all I have to do today is, find a nice place to camp or a place to stay that's safe, and find some food and maybe meet some interesting people. That's kind of my daily goal. And so as time went on, I learned more Spanish as I went. I tried as hard as I could to study, and I had my dictionary, and I was reading lots of books and trying to talk to people on the street. And I ended up volunteering in a couple of different places in Mexico. One of them was an English school where the guy had self-taught himself English, and then so he was teaching all the local kids English as well. That was fantastic. And he took me to a festival for Christmas. That was a great way again, just to sort of learn the local way of life and local culture and all of that. So I really loved Mexico, and then kind of the lessons I learned there flowed into Central America, where every country is unique and has its own kind of flair and flavour, but on the whole, everyone speaks Spanish. Everything is reasonably similar and feels familiar. And so a couple of logistical things that people always ask me about on a trip like this. What are the border crossings like? So I drove through 17 different countries, and so every single country is an international border just the same as the US to Canada. There are huge big fences, there are border guards, they are not just letting people walk across whenever they want. You must have a passport, all of that kind of stuff. So it is fairly a formal process to go through, but at the same time, once you've been through 2 or 3 of them, you really get the hang of it, and it really feels quite easy and quite manageable. But the basic process is really not much different than when we drive into the US. So your first stop is you go to immigration and you show them your passport. Every single country in the entire Americas, you don't need a visa for ahead of time. You can just show up and they'll stamp you in then and there. A couple of them you might pay $10 to stay for 3 months. So it's, the immigration side takes 10 minutes. Then basically you say to them, I have a car. And you can say it in English or Spanish, and they say, okay, go over there to customs. So you walk across the street or around the corner or down the road 100 meters, there's a big building, and you go in there and you say, I have a car, I'm a tourist. And they say, no problem. They say, fill out this piece of paper. And it's literally like, what's the colour of the car, what's the make, what's the model, what's its license plate, how many passengers does it seat, blah, blah, blah. They basically make you fill it out because they can't be bothered. You fill out the form, they stamp it a few times, they give you it back and they say, you are now legal in our country for 3 months. See you later, have fun. And so a lot of people don't know this. There is an international treaty. Right now, with your car that is registered here in BC, you can drive it to every single country in the world 100% legally. That's it. It's perfectly legal. I've now done it in 65 countries around the world with BC, Yukon, Alberta, and BC plates. That's perfectly fine. There's a few little intricacies. Maybe you have to get insurance, stuff like that. But even then, in all the countries I drove through, insurance was $10 for a month or $15 for a month. So it's not prohibitively expensive. It's not overly difficult. You don't have to apply ahead of time. You don't need these complicated documents or anything like that. And because you're a tourist and because you're only there temporarily, your car does not have to pass any safety inspections. It doesn't have to pass emissions testing. Basically, it's like an anomaly. If you guys have kept your eyes out, you will have seen vehicles driving around here that have like German plates on them. A couple of nods in the audience. Australian plates. Literally people from all over the world can bring their car to Canada and drive around no problem. And Canada actually lets them stay for a whole year with their car. Doesn't matter what side the steering wheel is on, doesn't matter any of that. They're tourists, it's all about temporary. As long as you leave within your designated time period, It's actually reading. The next thing lots of people ask me about is, what about extortion? So yes, I did get stopped many times by police and military along the way, especially in Central America. And more often than not, the conversation would come around to, why don't you give me $10? Or they would say, you were driving too fast, you have to give me $100. And the first couple of times it happens, it is pretty scary. They do have guns. But as time goes on, you start to realise they will never ever hurt you as a tourist. If they even looked at you the wrong way or were mean to you, they would get in a lot of trouble and probably go to jail and probably lose their job. And so for them, this job, they're professional military or police, that's how they feed their families, that's how they support themselves. They don't want to do anything to jeopardise their job. So although they're carrying guns and although they're telling you to give them money, you certainly don't have to. And what I realised over time is it's about being really polite, it's about being really friendly, and it's about wasting their time. The more of their time you can waste, the more they just get disinterested, and eventually they just say, go away, I don't care anymore. And so I developed all these strategies where I would pretend that I didn't speak Spanish, I would pretend I didn't have any cash, I could only pay with my credit card. I would pretend everything under the sun that I could think of until they would eventually just tell me to go away. Too much trouble, exactly. Yeah. So you do start to learn over time that it isn't something you need to be scared of. It does happen. Some countries more than others, some regions more than others, but it's not kind of a big deal. And the other weird thing to remember is if you really are scared, if it really is getting dark and you worry, if you give them $20, they absolutely will leave you alone. That's it. So you've always got to get out of jail free cash, and it's only $20. So it's not that big a deal.
Current day tip is have a current dash camera because they won't do that kind of stuff in our camera.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different tricks you can use, and there's kind of a line you can cross where you almost start threatening them, and you almost start saying like, okay, I need you to fill out this documentation that says I'm paying you money, and this is from the government of Canada, and I'm going to submit it to my government, and then they will 99 times out of 100 get scared and run away. I did that a few times in Africa. But it is definitely a bit of a risky area because if you get the wrong officer, if you threaten him, he might get really angry, and then he's not the police. So I always personally found it was just like kill them with kindness. Oh, I'm so happy to be in your country. It's so beautiful. Thanks for having me. Oh, now do you know how I get to the lake? I want to go to the lake. Can you show me on the map? And you can just see their faces there. In Spanish, you say, I don't understand. You say, no entiendo. That means I don't understand. And I said it so many times in a row, I just say, no Nintendo. Which is like the horrible gringo way of pronouncing it. And you could see it as military guys, they're like, oh my god, it's like actually. Yeah, and then they just make you go away and get sick of it. The next thing I learned as time went on is that it turns out there's a massive community of people doing exactly what I was doing. And these days it's called overlanding. So that's kind of traveling a country or a continent or the world by a vehicle. Typically four-wheel drive, but there are tons of people doing it on motorbikes, there are people doing it on bicycles, there are people walking, and it turns out there are a lot more people doing it than we realise. Right now today there are a few thousand people driving an American Idol, like at any given time. It's becoming quite popular and quite known and quite doable. It's not sort of an exotic thing that only National Geographic people do. And so it's really cool. Once you get in with the community, you start meeting people and you hear about their trip, and especially I met people who were coming north and I was going south. So then it was fantastic because they had all the information I needed and I had all the information they needed. Things to do and see, border crossings, paperwork. So we're immediately friends for the paper. So all the way down through Central America, you do wind up crossing borders quite often. All the countries are pretty small. And you get in this routine and it all sort of flows. And soon enough you find yourself at the end of Central America. And there's this region called the Darien Gap, which I'm sure most people are aware of. So the Darien Gap is about 100 kilometres or 150 kilometres of swamp between the two continents. No road has ever been built. They talk about it every 5 years, and then it never happens. It would probably cost a fortune. Politically, I think it's really difficult, and the US blocks it because they're worried about drug trafficking and people trafficking. So it seems very unlikely it'll ever actually happen. People have actually driven it with military support. The first people ever to do it took 741 days to drive 150 kilometres. Yeah. And I've actually met Patty Upton and her husband Lauren, who are the people who did it, and I've met them, and they're really awesome people. But she describes working for a week to move the Jeep, like 3 Jeep lengths. So they were cutting down the jungle, putting the trees under the tyres, pushing it, inching it, carrying it, building a raft to float it across the way. Like, you finish sort of like really nuts. So that was obviously not going to work for me. I don't have a big budget, I'm by myself, pretty little basic Jeep. So how do you get across the Darien Gap? There has been a ferry at various times, but it always seems to go bankrupt. So what 99% of people do is you put your vehicle inside a shipping container. And so it seems like a really daunting process, and it seems like something that would be really hard. But it turns out that shipping agents and shipping lines, they're experts at this. They do it all the time. They ship tens of thousands of these containers every day. So I showed up at a shipping agent in Panama City, and I said, I want to ship my Jeep to Colombia, and they were like, oh yeah, no problem, fill this out, like, easy, we do this all the time. Oh, okay. So it did end up, it took about a week of paperwork. You know, by the time you go to customs and get permission, and you go to the police and get permission, then you go to immigration and get permission, and kind of lots of paperwork, lots of filling out forms. But in the end, it works, you can do it. So I drove the Jeep into a little shipping container, and I shared the container with a French couple who were driving around the world in that Land Rover Defender. So we met up earlier and kind of crossed paths and decided to share a shipping container because then it's cheaper. You put 2 vehicles inside one container. And so I drove the little Jeep in there, locked the doors, the container got whisked away, and then I got on a plane, I flew to Colombia, which is a 25-minute flight, and about 4 days later, went down to the shipping port in Cartagena in Colombia and drove that little Jeep out of the container. And absolutely had no idea what to do or what was going on, or like, how am I possibly in South America driving the Jeep with Alberta plates on it that I previously just drove in Alaska? I was completely overwhelmed and excited and scared, and I honestly didn't know what to do. Again, it just didn't feel real. And then I was struggling to get around quite a bit, because I haven't mentioned this yet. I did not have a GPS, and I did not have a phone or any kind of navigation device at all. Maybe it was a little naive in hindsight. So it turns out navigation in Central America actually wasn't that bad, because in most countries there's kind of only 1 or 2 roads heading generally south, and you can generally make it up. Even when I was in the capital cities of Nicaragua or Costa Rica, you can kind of just follow your nose and it's doable. That all changed a little bit when I got to South America. I drove into a city in Colombia of like 10 million people and spent 4 hours driving around in circles. So utterly lost and no idea how to get out of the city again. So what I ended up doing, my technique was that I would just stop and ask police for directions, which was varying success depending on the day. So a quick little lesson in Spanish. Does anyone here speak a little bit of Spanish? These are some of the early words I picked up. Does anyone remember how to say left? So it's izquierda, yeah. Right? Derecho, yeah, derecha. Backwards? Atrás? Back that way, or forwards? Recto. So these were the words that I would always try and ask and trouble them out. And of course, none of that actually matters at all. You don't need to know any of that. The only thing that ever happens is they say, recto. So you go, recto. It's not far, don't worry, recto. And so, of course, this is extremely unhelpful. And the most hilarious times are when you'd ask a group of policemen, and they'd think about it for a while, and 2 of them would adamantly point in different directions, both yelling, recto. At which point I started to realise it probably wasn't worth stopping to ask the directions. So I spent a lot of time getting lost in the big cities of South America. It took me 4 hours to get out of Quito in Ecuador, and it wasn't fun. I don't recommend going without a GPS. In more recent trips, I take a GPS. And then, so I suddenly found myself in monstrous South America, and I was a bit listless. I didn't quite know how to handle it, and I actually started to think about giving up and stopping because I was pretty lonely. I was pretty exhausted. I'd been on the road for a year by now, you know, living in a tent. I kind of wasn't sure if I wanted to keep going. And I talked to friends and family, and they all suggested taking a break for a while. I said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And I found this hostel in Ecuador, that is Cotopaxi, the volcano, and I'm standing in the front garden of the hostel. It's called the Secret Garden. And it turns out it was run by an Australian guy and his Ecuadorian wife. And I didn't know any of this. I literally just found it in the London Planet, drove in there, talked to the guy, and I was like, can I volunteer here? And he was like, sure. Then I'd been there, I think, a week. And he was like, Dan, you seem like you've got your head screwed on straight. Why don't you manage the place so I want to get out of here for 5 months? So I wound up managing this hostel in Ecuador for 5 months. Totally random. And so this was the ever-changing view of volcano Cotopaxi, which every single morning and every single night just blew my mind. I'm trying to remember some of the stats about it. It's not the world's tallest volcano. I think it's the world's tallest active volcano. And if it erupts, it will obliterate the city of Quito. It's kind of all downhill, and the whole mountain will turn into mud, and the mud will just bury everything. And everyone just lives with that and knows it. And that is a glacier, and it's essentially on the equator. I was maybe 100 or 150 kilometers from the equator. And so I spent 5 months looking at the mountain and like thinking about it. And I went on a camping trip with the locals, like around the back of the mountain. It was a crazy adventure. And so after 5 months, I got up the courage and I actually climbed to the top of it. So it's 5,897 meters, 20,000 feet. And I felt like my head was going to split in half from the altitude sickness. It kicked my backside severely. It was horrible. And I don't know that I'd ever do any high altitude mountaineering again. That's like one and done for me. In the background of that photo, you can see Ecuador's highest mountain, Chimborazo, is back there. And I could actually see some smoke coming out of the crater of the volcano that I was standing next to. So it was an amazing experience, definitely type 3 fun, maybe not to be repeated. People also often ask about what were the roads like, you know, on this trip through Central and South America. And my answer is always, it really depends where you're trying to go. Much like in BC, if you stick to the highways, the roads are good. You can drive a Honda Civic, no problem. Same story through all of Central and South America. If you want to go exploring down some logging roads, they're probably pretty decent gravel, and like a RAV4 would be appropriate, no problem, or a Subaru would. But then, if you really want to get remote, things just are completely no limits. You might find washed up ridges, you might find roads that haven't been driven for years. Anything goes if you try to get remote enough. That being said, if it's somewhere worth getting to, locals are probably driving there in some extremely worn out, beat up pickup truck that has ball tires. So if they can make it, pretty much I can make it in my little Jeep. So it was always reassuring to know that that little Jeep could go pretty much anywhere I wanted it to go. In terms of roads, there was one extraordinarily famous road that I made a big detour to try and get to. Does anyone recognise those signs? Pretty famous road, the South Youngest Road, commonly called the Death Road, or the world's most dangerous road. For a time, this was the only road that went from kind of high up in the mountains to down to a village, and it's glued to the side of the mountain. And buses, this is in Bolivia, buses in Bolivia and Peru drive like maniacs. They commonly come around blind corners on the wrong side of the road at high speed. So buses fall off the side of these cliffs like every week. So for a time, there was a period of time when more people died on this road than any other road in the world. By the time I got there, the road had been replaced by sort of a better road, so there was really no traffic on it when I drove it, which kind of means it's safer. And these days you can ride a mountain bike on it if you want to. There's two companies that you can ride a mountain bike from top to bottom. And this was the only video I took on the whole trip. You might not be able to hear the audio, but the audio is not so important.
So here we are, the world's most dangerous road. To give you guys an idea what it looks like, it's pretty gnarly. Sorry, I'm going to hold the camera with one hand and drive as well. It's a huge change. So just bear in mind, this is a straight road. I just
probably heard I tapped the horn as I was going around the corner. It was a habit I developed to try and let the buses know I was there. Because I had too many close calls where on a blind corner, the bus was fully in my lane. And it's just a scramble to swerve and hope for the best. So I had a few, probably 2 or 3 that really scared me. And so after that, I just went slower and used the horn more. And then it was kind of okay. Long way. Also in Bolivia, lots of people have probably heard of the Uyuni salt flats. I believe these are the biggest salt flats in the world. And it's really a great adventure to try and drive across the salt flats. And so to do such a thing, I didn't want to go by myself. And so I teamed up with these other travellers that I met along the way. And so on the left there, Warren and Sarah, they were actually from the UK. And they bought that forerunner in California, and we're doing the same trip as me. And then Warren there in the middle, he was from California, I think, and he'd ridden that Harley all the way down, like a Harley Davidson. And now we're setting out to cross this really remote stretch, world's most inappropriate motorcycle. Sure, let's go, this will be fun. So the thing is, you cross the salt flat, you could do it in a couple of days, but then it kind of leads into the Atacama Desert, and then you're in no man's land, sort of Bolivia, getting into Chile, through the desert, really remote. You couldn't get straight information about how long it was going to take, how much food we needed, all that kind of stuff. So we just carried as much as we could and went for it. And the salt flats themselves are utterly incredible. It feels like being on the moon where you have no sense of scale. You can't tell how big anything is. And then south of the salt flats, you get into, they call this the painted desert in Bolivia. So I think in this photo we're about 4,000 meters in elevation, like really high elevation, but then the mountains go even higher, and there are all these spectacular colours. And the light has this really strange quality because you're up so high and there's so much dust. I clearly remember on this day, I had to stop about every 15 minutes and wipe the dust off my sunglasses because I couldn't see anything. Even with my window up, there was so much dust inside the jeep, I just couldn't see. It was an intense drive, and this is the Green Lake. That volcano marks the border of Chile, and so we're sort of finally getting towards the edge of the desert and all of that. And then here we are, this is the international border into Chile. There is like a shack just to the side where I stamped my passport. My photos are out of order a bit. That's where we camped one night, and that's actually an island in the middle of the salt flats. And so we hiked and drove all the way around the island, and then we had to continue going. And then, I think you guys saw that photo. My photos are out of order, sorry. So yeah, you don't get a sense of scale. You can't tell how big anything is. And so people always take these really fun forced perspective photos where you can make things look bigger than they are or smaller than they are. I'm on a loop here.
Was there lots of flamingos?
There were lots of flamingos. Good memory. Yeah. Strangely, yeah, you get to these little lakes and you're in the middle of nowhere, it's super windy, it's super cold, and then there's just flamingos everywhere. Yeah, it's really bizarre. And actually, this trip through the salt flats, I would say, is probably the highlight of my whole adventure, like in a self-contained, I think we spent 7 days out there. And when I think about it, it's this adventure that led me to future adventures, which we'll talk about in a minute. It was a really intense 7 days of kind of like, we had to travel by our wits, we had to be careful how much fuel we used, we had to be careful with food and drinking water. And we really felt like it was kind of like us as a team trying to get through this really remote region where we had kind of no support and we go days without seeing anyone else.
The Harley did all right?
The Harley struggled a lot. He dropped it probably 200 times. And we would scramble over there and help him pick it up, and we all just helped push through the sand and push through the mud, and it was just like a battle. But Rob he was like 6'6" and like a really big guy, and he just kept a smile on his face, and he just did it. Yeah, wearing like full leathers in the sun. Yeah. Since then too, he's shipped his bike to Africa and ridden all of Africa and I think somewhere else. Charlie the Harley is the name of his bike. He's more crazy than me, I think. And then so time goes on, I continued through South America, and then down in Buenos Aires in Argentina. My family actually flew in for Christmas. Yeah, that was an amazing thing because we hadn't all been together in the same place for 4 or 5 years at that point. And And so I rented a little apartment right in downtown Buenos Aires, and mum and dad, you know, were just so happy to be there, and I got to translate everything into Spanish, and we just had a fantastic time. Lots of laughs, lots of really good memories. And then from Buenos Aires, I just continued on. I pushed on down the coast, and that photo on the bottom right there, that is literally the end of the road. I already had driven past kind of the safety barrier to get that photo. And it says that Alaska is 18,000 kilometers away. Somehow by that point, I'd already driven 30-some thousand. So I don't know, I took the wrong turn. And at that point, I was at the southern tip, and I was kind of lost, and I didn't really know what to do with myself. It was difficult to think, like, what am I going to do with my life? But before we get to that, on the trip itself, like overall highlights or things that I really remember that stuck with me. Hiking for me at the time was my number one activity in the whole world. And so I often think of it as like, I didn't really want to be in the Jeep. I just wanted to take it to really cool places and then get out of it and go hiking for days at a time. And so this is sort of a highlight reel of some of the hikes that I took through all the different continents. First of all, visiting the Magic Bus in Alaska. For anyone that's read Into the Wild or seen the movie, that was a really moving experience for me. It was really powerful. I thought the bus would be a bit of a sad place because Chris really did die there. But actually, I've never been anywhere in my whole life that is like a happy or more energetic place. There's graffiti all over the walls. There's all these messages in the guest book. People that are like, Chris, you inspired me so much. I changed my whole life to visit here, and now I'm going to spend the rest of my life as a wheel in the sky because of you. Just like hundreds and hundreds of stories like that. And so it was a really special place to spend time. Sadly, they've now moved the bus. It's not in the wilderness anymore. They put it in the museum in Alaska. Lots of people still hike to where it was. For those who know where it was, it's still a good place to go. When I was in Guatemala, I hiked up a volcano, and that is lava. And it melted the bottom of my feet, my shoes. I roasted marshmallows on it, which was really fun. The marshmallows stick. You could just push it into the lava and it would just vanish. Just gone. I picked up a few rocks and threw them in, and it was really fun. The rocks would sort of sit on top of the lava, like it had like a bit of a skin on it. And then as time went on, they kind of just slowly sink down and like, nope, you're gone. When the wind shifted, the heat would come across, and it was like standing in front of a blast furnace. We just had to like howl from the heat. Like burned all the hair off my legs. That was a really powerful thing. I'd never seen lava before, and it was really impressive. One of those moments where you realise the Earth is truly alive, like always constantly changing and always on the move. When I was in Peru, I hiked out here. That's Peru's tallest mountain in the distance. And I kind of camped out here by myself for like a week, and the Jeep was down the bottom of the valley, and every day I would just strike out up this mountain. Just to be out in nature, just to be out in the wilderness. I saw maybe a person a day for a week, just out there all by myself, and it was amazing. If anyone's ever heard of a hike called the Cordillera Whitewash, it's in Peru. It's a 10-day hiking circuit. Usually gets rated the second best hike in the world after Annapurna in Nepal. And so you're hiking this the whole time, kind of around these monstrous mountains. And for anyone that's read Touching the Void, Joe Simpson's book, where his climbing partner cuts the rope and he falls to his presumed death, that's the mountain there behind me. And I read that book when I was maybe like 16 in high school, and I never imagined in my wildest dreams that I'd ever get here to see it. And so I just have such a clear memory of when I took my camera's like propped up on my backpack. I have such a clear memory of like I was shaking with excitement. I scurried up and down there for an hour, all by myself, just felt so alive and so happy to have kind of made it there and like see what it looked like, and to maybe like, get a tiny bit closer to an epic adventure like they had, even though it went horribly wrong. But it was a really special time to be out there in nature like that. That's, want to help you? Thank you, man. Thanks, Roy. You know more than I do. And so it has this really famous like sunrise flash. And so I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning and hiked up to the lookout, and it was worth it. It was cold and it was worth it. Nearby, this is called the Southern Patagonian Ice Field. So this is the world's second biggest ice field behind the one in Alaska. It was really cool actually, sitting there like that, it's ice as far as you can see. But then back in the visitor centre, they had one of those kind of 3D maps that show you where you were. And if the ice field is my arm, I was standing where my fingernail is. So we're looking at this much of the ice field, and the ice field is all of this. So it's immense, really cool to see. And then of course Torres del Paine in Patagonia. It is as beautiful as everyone says. It is incredible. I loved it. I think I spent 5 days hiking around the circuit and absolutely loved it. And most or some of this hiking was kind of after I reached the southern tip. So I drove to the tip of South America and then I came back up, kind of hiked in Patagonia, and I spent, I think, 5 months without sleeping inside a building, purely in my tent, just hiking and camping the whole time. And then I ended up winding all the way back around to Buenos Aires, and that was the end of my trip. And so just some statistics or some kind of high-level overview of the trip ended up taking just short of 2 years. When I left Calgary, I thought it would take 1 year, but I really didn't know. I just made that up. Yeah, probably 40 times they tried to bribe me, and I paid once. It was $5. And then, yeah, I probably slept in my tent about 75% of the nights. Sometimes I'd get a room in a hostel. When I managed the hostel, they were nice enough to give me a bed. Yeah. And then we all know goodbyes are really hard. And so that photo is standing at the airport in Buenos Aires. The guy who bought the Jeep off me took that photo for me before I hopped on the plane. And I'd spent the whole 2 years saying my Jeep was my girlfriend. So obviously goodbyes are really tough. And I still miss that little Jeep a lot, but it was the right decision at the time. I had bought it for $5,000 in Calgary. I drove it the whole way, and I sold it for $5,000. So, and shipping it back probably would have been at least a few thousand. So money-wise, it didn't make any sense. I didn't have any money left at all. I'd actually lived on my credit card for the last little bit of the trip, so I needed to just move on and do something else with my life. So it was a really hard decision to make, but I made it. That photo is actually taken in Rossland here. My brother was living here at the time, and so I flew all the way back right here to Rossland. And some more stats on the trip. So I did run out of gas once. It was hilarious. Locals picked me up. They ended up taking me to a wedding that night. Random. I had lots of flat tires because I had really cheap tires. So my advice, don't buy cheap tires. It's not worth it. I probably used about 8,000 litres of gas. And the average was about 90 miles an hour. The little Jeep was a 4-cylinder, so it actually was okay on gas as far as Jeeps go. Yeah, which means I spent about $7,000 on gas, which was by far and away the least expensive the whole trip. What was the total cost of the entire trip? Who thinks it cost $50,000 or more? Really? Normally that's everywhere. What about $40,000 or more? Really? $30,000 or more?
You said you were going cheap.
Wow, you guys are a tough audience. Total cost for the whole trip, $27,300. Wow. Which works out to be about $1,200 a month, about $40 a day. Which, when I thought about it, I was spending $1,200 a month to go to work every day in Calgary before I ever left. By the time I paid rent and food and gym and car insurance, so driving to Argentina didn't cost me any more money than it cost me to go to work every day. Sure, I didn't make any money while I was on the road, so I was spending money. But amazingly, it doesn't have to be expensive if you don't want it to. A really good friend of mine drove it. She finished just before COVID, and she spent like 16,000 Canadian dollars for the whole trip. So you can definitely do it a lot cheaper than I did, if you want to. I went scuba diving when I was in Colombia and Panama. I did some expensive things here and there. I went paddling in icebergs in Alaska. So I didn't try to make it cost like bare bones minimum, but I tried to make it not expensive. In terms of your trip or like thinking about doing something like this, there are now more than 1,000 people doing this every year, which means there's a lot of information out there. So there's an app on your phone. It's also a website. It's called iOverlander. And it literally has everything in it that you would ever need to do know to make this drive. Campsites, borders, embassies, places to buy food, places to fill up your propane tank, places to get drinking water, interesting things like lakes or hot springs or rivers. It's all based on GPS coordinates, it's all like user source, so it's other people who put the information in there. And I bet if we looked at it right now, we would find someone who drove across the border between Costa Rica and Panama within the last week, and they were allowed to comment about what paperwork they needed and how long. Go to the yellow building, give them this piece of paper, go to that one. So it's extremely up to date and helpful. I couldn't imagine doing these kind of trips without it these days. It's really useful. And so yeah, there's a huge community of people, and they're super supportive and super helpful, and everyone loves to share their knowledge and tell stories and get together. So if it is something you've ever thought about doing, you really can do it. You don't have to live in National Geographic. You don't have to be rich. And so obviously, as you might imagine, I got a little bit addicted to this kind of lifestyle, or this kind of travel. So I actually, when I got back, I went all out to Whitehorse, I got an engineering job, and within the first week I said, this is just stupid, I don't want to do this. I knew within a week that all I was going to do was save money and then quit. It ended up taking 4 years of saving money, but after 4 years I did quit, and I spent 3 years driving all the way around Africa, so I went right around the whole coastline, which there were adventures and there were plenty of misadventures in Africa. And if you guys are interested, we could talk about, I could give another talk here in the future about that trip. It's a whole thing in itself. And then during COVID, my new partner and I, we went to Australia, and we spent a year and a half driving all of the most remote roads and deserts and wilderness in Australia, kind of exploring far and wide. And then we actually just got back. We now have a little girl. She was 6 months old when we left Nelson, where we live now, and we took our new vehicle to Iceland. And then we went all the way down through Europe and then into Tunisia in North Africa. So we were on the road for a year with our little one. She was 6 months old when we left, a year and a half when we got home. So she spent twice as long living in that Jeep as she spent living in a house. It's a kind of stat we like to talk about. So yeah, I've kind of turned this into my whole life. And people have often said over the years, why don't you write a book? And so I have. I've written a couple of books. For anyone that's interested, this is the one about Argentina, kind of expands on everything we've talked about tonight. And then I've also written a book about the 3 years in Africa, and that is a much bigger book because a lot more things happened. And I also have a photography book of Africa as well. And you guys are welcome to flip through it and have a look if you're interested in buying one. But these are $20 each. If anyone's interested, I've brought a few tonight. And with that, I'll open it up to questions about literally anything and everything. So, when I shipped from Panama to Colombia, it was $777 finished, all done. Oh, sorry, I'll just finish my train of thought, sorry. More recently, it's about $1,200 to cross the Darien Gap, Panama to Colombia. COVID jumped prices a lot. Shipping to Iceland was $3,300, and then I shipped it back from Holland to Halifax. That was about $3,500. Yeah. So it's not inexpensive, but also when you're in Iceland, a pretty good rental car is very expensive. And so I think we ran the numbers, if we stayed more than a month, we were going to do better off shipping our own than we stayed 3 months.
So you were on the salt flats. You didn't have a GPS system.
No.
So how did you know you were going in the right direction?
We kind of didn't. I had a compass and a map, and we kind of, I guess we had this like high level plan. I don't remember how we came up with it. But it was like, we need to get to the island. And then we looked on a map and we looked at the compass bearing, and then, there were sort of like tire tracks on the salt. You could sort of see what other people had driven before. We just followed some tire tracks.
That must be so spooky, though, with nothing to actually point of interest.
It was really strange. You couldn't tell how fast you were going, you couldn't tell how far away anything was. Even when I got separated from my friends, even by probably just like a few hundred meters, it felt like 10 kilometers. Yeah. And then we ended up, after the main salt flat, you go down into the desert, and then there's just kind of tracks everywhere. And we ended up in a military base, and we ended up like in a village, and everyone just kept being like, yeah, go that way, like Recto. And you were like, yes, we'll just keep going. I guess we just fumbled our way along. True. Yeah, it worked.
Very adventurous. Where's next?
We're saving money right now and planning. Russia's really messing with life right now. It's really annoying. So we don't have concrete plan right now. Yeah. Saving money always takes the longest. So we'll just prioritise that. And then once there's enough money in the savings account, we can become more serious thinking about where we'll actually go.
What was the elevation of those salt flats? Like high?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was really high. Yeah, I want to say 3,000 metres or 3,500. Yeah.
And were they really hard? Like
Rock hard. Yeah, the salt is rock hard. Except if it rains, it's notorious everyone's vehicle gets stuck. And near the edges, it was kind of like wet and muddy, and lots of people get stuck there as well. We didn't have trouble. But yes, sleeping up at that elevation, I remember I would often wake up in the middle of the night and like my heart would be racing, and I just couldn't get enough oxygen. You feel like you run a marathon and we were sleeping. And yeah, it was cold.
Was the salt greasy?
Yes, very. Yeah. It was like sandpaper, like you rubbed your hand on it. Yeah. No, no salt flats on no flat tires on salt flats. The flat tires were always like a nail or a piece of steel or like, some foreign object that was discarded on the road when I drove over. Oh yeah. Yeah, so back then I used a lot of internet cafes. And so I was emailing like every week roughly, I guess. And then I remember having phone cards and like calling and yeah, a lot of stuff, I'm sure. Yeah. And they were worried about me before I left, my family. But I think as time went on, they started to realise that I was pretty like determined and serious and like was doing the best I could to be as safe as possible and like planning ahead, and I wasn't just kind of being reckless. And so over the years, they've come to accept that this is what I do.
Are you doing a video blog now?
I am, yeah. So I've got lots of content now on YouTube and Instagram and all that.
Did you see anyone traveling with your dog?
Yep.
Is that so that's possible across the borders?
100%. Yep. There's a whole Facebook group called Travellers with Pets, I think it's called. And yeah, the information's out there. I think you just need like 1 or 2 certificates, like an international vaccine certificate. But it's really common now. No. Yeah, it's really common. Lots of people do it with dogs and cats. And even back then, I bumped into tons of people doing it with kids. And one of my strongest memories actually, I was in Colombia with a French family, so like mum and a dad and 2 kids. And we were just sort of sitting in like the town square, like Latin America, all the towns have a square. And at night, it's super busy and like lots vibrant. And I remember the kids running around, and they went off to order pizza for us because they spoke better Spanish than we did. They were like maybe 8 or 10. And then one of the girls came over, and of course she spoke French and Spanish, and now she's speaking to me in English. And she said, yeah, we don't really like homeschooling. We love world schooling. These kids were just getting an amazing education on the road, like living in a campman or something. But yeah, there's all kinds of people out there doing it in every way you can imagine. There's people who fly in and do a few months at a time and then fly home. There's people who maybe do Central America and then fly home and do South America. Or, there's no rules, there's no limits. You can kind of mix and match whatever works for you.
I'm curious about meals and food. Was there any typical meals you would eat, like from breakfast to dinner, and also how was it to eat differently when you would eat contemporary?
At first, I was really stubborn about cooking all my own food, and so my routine, I had oats for breakfast essentially every single day. Lunch was always weird for me. I never really got into a routine. Sometimes it was ramen noodles, sometimes it was a canned soup, sometimes it was a sandwich, just kind of whatever I could scrounge. And then dinner I would always try to cook like pasta or rice with whatever vegetables I could find. But as time went on, especially once I got into Central and South America, I realised I could buy like a full plate of food for $1. And then sometimes it was 75 cents. So that was like, hang on a minute, this doesn't make any sense anymore. And then so my routine actually became a lot of Central American South. I would intentionally camp out in the wilderness somewhere because you're away from people and you're in nature and it's beautiful. And then whenever I needed to, if I used up my time or I was ready to leave, I would drive out and kind of end up in a town around about lunchtime. And town was always great because I could get gas, I could get drinking water, and I could resupply on food. Usually I'd go to a street market. So there's people sitting on the ground selling like tomatoes and carrots and potatoes, a huge shopping bag for $1. So you buy all of that. And then while I was there, street markets always have someone selling street food. And so I started buying street food for lunch because it was extremely delicious and it was cheap. And so I would just eat like as many tacos as I could, or like fried chicken and fries, or like Peru has this really amazing like noodle dish called shepa, and then somewhere else has like a fried rice dish that was amazing. And so I would eat huge quantities at lunch, and then I would sort of drive out into the wilderness again to camp for the night and like cook my own dinner. So sort of as time went on, I ended up buying a lot of lunches, and I convinced myself it was cheaper that way anyway, which might have been true.
Did you ever get sick?
Yeah, especially in Central America, I got sick quite a lot. I think because you're eating with your hands quite a bit. And I tried really hard to use sanitizer and wash my hands, but I just got sick anyway because I was eating street food. But then in South America, I remember being really shocked to see like cutlery when I was in Colombia. Whoa, I haven't seen like a knife and fork in a while. And then I got a lot less sick in South America. Yeah, maybe only once or twice. The food was just delicious, basically everywhere. And I would always go back for the spicy, and the locals would just laugh at me. It was hilarious. They thought it was because I could eat it. It was great. Yeah. So, did you have a question? Okay.
We're looking at doing a trip up to, my husband wants to go from Jasper north up to the Arctic Ocean at some point.
Yeah.
What's, do you have to have a vehicle with, like, we're thinking about an SUV, but he's worried about tires and some of the dumpster highway, and do you write about that, or do you suggest resources for traveling north that way?
After this trip, I went out to Whitehorse and moved up there for 4 years. Like, I've driven the Dempster 20 times.
Okay.
I drove it in my $400 Subaru many times, and it was absolutely no problem. Just make sure you have really good quality tires. Yeah, you can do it in any vehicle. It's a perfectly good gravel road. Obviously, in winter, I have good starter tires. But yeah, and it's maybe the most beautiful road I've ever seen in my life.
And camping is fine?
Yep.
For the most part?
Yep, there's an official campground at Tombstone, which is an hour up the road, and it's phenomenal. And then everywhere after that, you can wild camp, like every 20 kilometers, you'll find somewhere that's perfectly good wild camp. You know, you just drive off the road 300 meters, and there's like a little pull out, and there'll be a fire ringing, and you just look at the mountains. Yeah. The Dempster's amazing. I could give a whole talk on the Dempster right now. It's amazing. Yeah, I love it up there.
It's I recommend time of year to do that trip.
Up north.
Yeah, to Yukon, dipping glass.
Yeah, so June, July, August. There's not going to be any snow. The sun is up for 22 or 24 hours a day. You can go anywhere you want. Hiking, camping, everything is on the table. If you go earlier than that, like I've walked on lakes at the end of May, that's frozen, and then it'll definitely snow in September, and it'll be stuck on the ground in Whitehorse on Halloween. So if you're north of Whitehorse, it'll be stuck on the ground like early October. Bugs will be horrific in July, and that's kind of that. Yeah, in September it'll really be numb. Yeah, I was just there in September, and like my hands were swollen for 3 weeks from the black fly bites. Yeah, in late September. Yeah, it just, every year is different. Actually, when I was on this trip, I was on way up in the Arctic Circle, and I was going to go for a hike, and so I was sitting in the Jeep, getting all my hiking gear ready in my water bottle, and I heard this noise, and I'm like, oh, that's weird, it's raining. Kept getting ready, and then I looked in my rear view mirror, and I could hardly see because of the cloud of mosquitoes. And so the noise I heard wasn't rain, it was mosquitoes hitting the car. So I didn't go for a hike. Yeah, but then it's kind of funny, when you get to the Arctic Ocean, the temperature drops like 20 degrees, and then there's no bugs anymore, it's too cold. Yeah, and the sun doesn't go down at all. Like, does that. So I think I went to bed about midnight, and I lay down on my pillow, and oh, that's weird, I still have my sunglasses on. It's just really bizarre experiences. Yeah.
I was in Scotland, I was in Germany,
Oh, amazing.
When we all have.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah, you need an eye mask for sure.
it just magnifies it.
Yeah, the North, it's utterly spectacular. I always say every Canadian should try as hard as they can to get up to the Yukon, because it's such a phenomenally beautiful part of the country that I think a lot of people don't realise I haven't seen. Yeah, no, I love it. We can go back for sure. Anyone else have any questions?
Why overlanding versus just staying at hostels and flying to like Central America or South America? Canada and the United States makes sense, but like down there,
It's a good question. I kind of decided at some point that I wanted to be in charge of my own trip and that I wanted to go where I wanted to go on my timeline. And I did end up meeting like a ton of backpackers. There's thousands of people getting around Central and South America. And they're all sort of on like the same buses and they're all going to the same places. And if you ever got to a place where the bus went, suddenly there's like thousands of tourists. All I needed to do was jump in a Jeep and drive half an hour. And literally locals would say to me like, how did you even get here? Like nobody comes here. Like, nobody ever comes to this glacier. I was like, yeah, I drove. And so I got really addicted to that idea of like, I get to go where I want. Yeah, which maybe is kind of like a selfish thing, or like maybe I'm a bit of a lone wolf and I kind of want to do my own thing. But I feel like there's this real sense of like achievement or like, yeah, self-sufficiency when you're like, it's on me to sort of get to where I want to get to. Yeah, I think tons of backpackers, they end up sort of just on this bus circuit. And actually I met people who, they didn't even really know what city they were in. They're like, oh, no, just get on the bus and I'm rocking here. And now I'm in a hostel drinking beer again. And the same as I was last time, the same as I was the night before that. Yeah, so it was just pros and cons. I mean, it depends what kind of trip you want to have. If I was 19 and I wanted to party a lot, that'd be great. Yeah, I wasn't 19 and I'm definitely not 19 now.
because yeah, when I did my Costa Rica in South America for 2 months, around that $40 to $50 a day, so kind of comparable to what you saw in your travels.
Yeah.
So that's actually quite unique.
Yeah, I think overland you can save a ton of money on sleeping, because a lot of times you don't have to pay at all, and you can save a ton of money on food. Of course, the really big one is you spend money on gas. And anytime you have to transport the vehicle, like if you are shipping it between continents, that kind of ruins the budget.
Was it a problem to get you that?
Yeah. No. So I guess it's a weird thing to think about, but every country in the world has cars and trucks and motorbikes, and all of those people want to buy gas. So in a lot of countries, actually, gas was more available than it is here. So, you know, tonight I drove up here from Nelson to here, and maybe I passed like 5 gas stations or something. If this was Central America, every 5 kilometres there'd be someone selling gas in Coca-Cola. Because they're like just some like, you know, to motorbike people or people who ran out. Or, so in a lot of ways, it's actually more available down there. I always bought it from stations, except I think a couple of times because I was a bit worried about the quality. But I never had a problem. The Jeep never cared what kind of fuel I put in it. Just never an issue.
Must have had a lot of oil changes.
And I always deal with my own maintenance on the Jeep. So I would often kind of find a town, find like the mechanic district of town, and then just find a yard that looked appropriate and just ask the guys and be like, can I just change my oil over here in the corner? And 99% of the time, they'd be like, how many kilometres on the oil? And when I said 10,000, they're like, oh my God, can we have the oil? We'll put it in now. Because for them, that was great. That was like practically new oil. So, and you know, they're just really happy to chat. And then I had to look around at the brakes and check for any oil leaks and all that kind of stuff. And there was never a problem. So I did oil changes and tyre rotations every 10,000 kilometres, and literally nothing else ever on the Jeep. I like to say we've flirted over the years. I definitely have been in a few marketing calls with them and like been and had a tour of the factory, and they're very aware of who I am and what I do. And they still wouldn't give me
What's your favorite vehicle that you've used on the crossing?
That's too hard. That's like favourite child question. You can't answer that. been super reliable. I've had quite a few different Jeeps over the years. So I had the little two-door Jeep that you guys saw a lot of this presentation. For Africa, I had this big four-door Jeep. I realised I needed better sleeping, I needed a fridge, and I needed a place to cook better food. I didn't want to just tolerate the trip and live in a tent. I wanted to really enjoy the trip. So that was kind of the genesis of that thing. Then in Australia, we got this thing called the Gladiator, which is like a pickup truck. It was brand new at the time. I kind of just wanted to see if it was any good. That was where I tried really hard with Jeep and didn't quite get it. It's close. And then for Iceland, I built this thing. I basically took a Jeep and cut it in half with an angle grinder and then put this composite box on the back of it that's like an apartment. So it has like a fridge and an induction cooktop and a hot shower and it was luxury compared to previous. Exactly, because we had a new one. Yeah. So we've kind of changed over the years and the pros and cons and this thing is amazing. It was really expensive. It was a bit stressful compared to the old little $5,000 Jeep where I was like, oh, if it burns to the ground, life goes on. If that burns to the ground, I'm in a lot of trouble. So, pros and cons, there's no perfect, they all kind of have their place. Yeah, on the Pan American trip, I would, kind of my first day in a new country, I kind of get into a routine where I try to get my feet on the ground. So I go to an ATM and I take out a few $100s of cash, in the local currency. I always wanted to have enough cash that I could buy a tank of gas or buy a hotel room tonight if the need arose, so I wouldn't get stuck. And I would say back then, 90% of my purchases were just cash like that. And so I would just spend that cash even to buy gas or for anything until it ran out, and I'd just go get more from the ATM. But these days, the credit card's going to work for 90% of purchases or more in every country in the world. Yeah, so it's just, in a lot of ways, it's much easier now than it was. There's a lot more information, but still very worth going. It's really rewarding. Yeah, and on the Pan American, I think Argentina was the only country that had a black market currency. So if you go to the ATM and take out money, maybe the exchange rate is 10 to 1. So for every $1 Canadian, you get 10 of theirs. But if you've got cash, US dollars cash, if you go find a guy on the street, he might give you 20 to 1. He might give you 50 to 1. Find the right guy on the right day, he might give you 100 to 1. So suddenly you just made the country 5 times cheaper. Just because you exchange money with him instead of doing it legally.
I think in Argentina too, that we should do it not very much and just do it because the interest.
Yeah, inflation is so severe, day to day, money's worth less. Yeah. And that changes. Argentina's a funny country where that changes, and at times they actually have ATMs that will just dispense US dollars, but then for whatever reason the government bans that and then they don't. And I think the situation's different every few months down there. Yeah. But then there are even a couple of countries that just use US dollars officially. Like Panama, their official currency is the US dollar. There is no such thing as Panama money. Just different countries have different kind of setups. Yeah.
How much research do you do before you go?
It depends where I'm going. Kind of depends. I like to think of it as how much of an adventure do you want to have. I think what made the salt flats so incredible in my memory was that we planned as much as we could, but we kind of couldn't plan because there just wasn't any information out there. We were talking to locals and asking about the gas station, and that was the best we could do. And then so we just went for it. And we kind of always had the idea of when we get to half of our gas reserves, let's think about turning back if we need to. And so to me, that's kind of way more exciting than just having the GPS tell me oh yeah, there's a gas station in $300. Fine. That almost takes away some of the enjoyment and the excitement. Yeah, I mean, I definitely have always enjoyed the adventure and the excitement, but you don't want things to go really badly wrong, like that. There's a point where suddenly you're oh crap, I wanted the unknown, but I didn't want that. Yeah, so it's I think it's a bit of a fine line between maybe overplanning and kind of spoiling the mystery or spoiling the adventure, but then you wouldn't want to be underplanned either and kind of, drive into something that you can't get yourself out of.
Well, how did you do that? A bit scary that one on the side.
Long story. Yeah, long story. That's for the next presentation.
Any worse than what you have to do?
Not in Central and South America, no. And the political situations, like, they change and they fluctuate, and I think on any given week there might be people kind of blockading the road and burning tyres because they're annoyed their government's not helping them pay for their school. And then next week, you wouldn't even know that they're there, there's no evidence of that. So it's kind of like evolving thing all the time. And you basically just talk to other people who've been there recently. Now there's Facebook groups, there's Iolander, there's just tons of like up-to-date information that will tell you, you know, oh hey, I was just there yesterday, this is what happened. It kind of gives you all that more information. Yeah, so you don't have to stuff like that. Bad weather. Yeah. I get, yeah, it's hard to sort of put into context, but when you cross continents like that, you experience kind of everything that nature has to offer. So like mountains, lakes, rivers, glaciers, beaches, jungles, mud, sand, rock, all of it is there. Ice, snow, all of it is there. You know, and it might be a week of one of them, and then you drive into a different week, or it could go on for a month, or it just sort of depends on the region, on the time of year. And I think with climate change now, the story of some of my trips has been, I get to a village and the locals are like, the weather's never like this, we've never seen this before. Because the weather's just not reliable anymore, it's not what it used to be. So yeah, definitely like torrential downpours, heavy snowfalls, droughts, severe. Patagonia is infamous for wind. It's brutal. Yeah, kind of everything. Yeah. And I think especially because back then my setup was so like living outside, I was in those elements every day. I couldn't really escape it feeling like I wanted to. Yeah. I think there was a question about that.
How'd you end up in Nelson?
When I lived in Calgary, my brother lived here in Rossland, and then he lived in Nelson for a couple of years. So I used to visit quite often, actually, in that little village. And so I loved Nelson and Rossland, and I kind of always knew that I would live here at some point. But to be honest, I wanted to go and have more adventures first. I was worried if I came here I'd get stuck because it's so good. So then I went to Whitehorse, and that was amazing. I went to Africa, and then when I got back from Africa, it was late November. And I was too afraid to drive up to Whitehorse in late November, having just been in Africa for 3 years. And so I said, okay, this is the time, I'm going to live in Nelson, this will be great. And I've been there ever since. I got stuck, because it's that good. Yeah.
Have you ever followed Medicine Wood in his adventures?
Oh, I don't know that.
He's walked. There's the Volcano Island, walked through it to the Himalayas.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's a bridge.
Yeah. 1,000-mile walk.
Yeah.
1,000 miles. Just
There are people out there doing all kinds of adventures. And it's really always inspiring when you bump into people. Because it could just be a family in like their station wagon who are like, yeah, we've been on the road for a month, we're having fun. All the way up to, you know, like a guy walking or people on bicycles and inevitably you get chatting to them. And they're like, oh yeah, we went across Uzbekistan and we went to Mongolia and oh, we've been to the Congo and oh, Peru has been cool. And you're just like, what? How is that even possible? I don't understand. But yeah, there's people out there doing all kinds of really, really cool adventures.
he got into a lot of those issues. Depending on where you go.
Yeah. 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 But I think Central and South America, for the most part, are usually pretty stable in that regard. Yeah, Venezuela. It was off limits even back when I was there. It was not a good idea, so we go.
Well, that's why you have to go when you're young. When we're in water balls, there's all sorts of people.
Yeah, and I think too,
Scared to go because it's something.
as a foreigner too, I've often found like people just don't really care about it. You just set, like they're busy, they've got their own lives to live. Even if they're doing bad things, they're busy doing bad things. They don't have time to, you just show up and like, who's this guy, what's going on? Like, you kind of just like separate to life in some ways. Yeah, so it's not like trouble is just waiting to find you or any of that kind of stuff that people think about.
That's a great thing.
Funny enough, I think really standing out is a good deterrent. Like you see people who drive like those huge Unimog expedition trucks, Germans really love them. So I met quite a few people driving like literally $1 million vehicle. So it's as big as this room practically. Yeah. Yeah, like ginormous $1 million vehicle. No one's going to mess with that because he's too visible. Like, even actually when I was in Mexico, the guy who was the English teacher, he said to me straight, he's like, Dan, no one's going to steal your Jeep. It's categorically not going to happen. Because if a Mexican guy is driving your Jeep, the very first police officer is going to pull him over and say, why does that car not have Mexican plates on it? Like, that's wrong, I'm arresting you and then we'll sort this out. So he's like, yeah, they might smash your window and like steal your camera if you leave it lying down. He's like, they are not going to steal it, categorically, it's not going to happen. So that kind of gave me some confidence, and then I think like, I'm pretty active in the overlanding community now, and I speak at big events around the world. I've never met anyone who's had a foreign vehicle in the country and the vehicle has been stolen. It never happens. Yeah, broken windows, stolen cameras, stolen iPhones, sure. Actual stolen vehicle? No, they can't do it because they'll get caught too quickly. The vehicle is too like old. Yeah.
More likely to happen in Vancouver.
It's actually really interesting to see a lot of people talk about, how dangerous is the Pan American Highway, and inevitably there'll be 100 comments of people saying, the only time I don't mind is in the US. Like the most dangerous country for me was the US, or like we heard gunshots when we were in the US. Like it's just endless comments. No one mentions Nicaragua or Honduras or Costa Rica, or they're like, oh no, we sat on the beach in Costa Rica for a month. It was awesome. It's kind of interesting to like get the real world, like how people treat it. Yeah.
When we were down there in that British Columbia place, we did a couple where people ran the city and
Oh yeah. Yeah, are there any other questions? If you do have more, I'm extremely happy to help people. So my email address is there. You'll find me online if you look for me. I'm super happy to answer any more questions you have, or help out in any way I can with your own trip or your planning or whatever it is. So, thanks to the Rossland Museum. I really appreciate it.
All right, so one more round of applause. Monitoring the live stream. In fact, I had to do a quick search on it. I was like, oh, insane. Crazy video. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you guys for coming to hear it. As always, please deal with our snacks first so we don't have to. And maybe stop by that Save Record Bridge fundraiser on your way down the hill. And don't forget this is our family day coming up on the 15th, as well as that senior workshop on the 13th. Thank you guys for coming out.